Thousands of Australians took to the streets this Sunday in nationwide rallies organized by the far-right group, March for Australia. The demonstrations, which called for stricter immigration controls, sparked controversy and drew condemnation from the center-left government. Organizers say the rallies are about addressing concerns over housing, infrastructure, traffic, wages, environmental impact, and cultural cohesion. Their website claims the government has failed to act, prompting citizens to demand a halt.
So the tension is rising in the West. People are complaining about housing affordability, about the rising cost of living. It's becoming a real issue for Australians, for Americans, for a lot of people in the liberal, capitalist, democratic societies. Young people cannot afford what the parents and grandparents were able to afford. But is it really an immigration problem that we see all these right-wing protests demanding governments to remigrate and deport anybody who is not white, or there is a different problem for this? So before we go and discuss this, let's just state the obvious, something that anybody 5 years old should know. It's called the quantity theory of money. So in short, it says that the value of money is determined by the amount of money available in the economy. So in short, you increase the money supply in the economy, the value of money depreciates, and that what causes inflation, or what is reflected in the economy in the form of inflation or hyperinflation. So in Australia, for instance, during COVID time, Australian government increased the money supply in their economy by around $350 billion. And in America, during almost the same time, the government increased their supply by about $1.5 trillion. How does the government increase the money supply in the economy? There must be a mechanism for that. So this is all governed by the government's monetary and fiscal policy. So the government has two arms, the Treasury and the Reserve Bank. And in case of America, it's like the Fed. So the government basically exercises their sovereign right and authority to issue money, and they mandate its acceptance in transaction. But there's mechanisms for issuing and creating money. So out of those mechanisms, we're going to be discussing the main practice that I claim is causing is a root cause for inflation and hyperinflation, and especially in the post-COVID era. This practice is called the government securities and treasury bonds, and in this video, we're going to be unpacking how this mechanism works. So you've got the two arms of the government, the Australian government treasury in this case, and the Reserve Bank of Australia, the RBA. So what happens is the government, through its own arms, makes an agreement that the government will be issuing those treasury bonds, but the RBA has to go out and make that announcement that they are going to buy those government-issued security bonds. Those security bonds are typically, they have something called the maturity date. So they have a lifetime. This lifetime is typically between 10 to 30 years, and the government commits for whoever buys those security bonds to pay them an annual interest of almost 1%. So that's kind of like an incentive for whoever is going to be buying those security or government bonds. It's sort of like an investment, a long-term investment. Okay, so the numbers that we have, that the Australian government in November 2020 through the RBA announced that the RBA would purchase $100 billion worth of bonds. In Feb 2021, another 100 billion. In September 2021, 4 billion per week until Feb 2022. And then by that date, the government has accumulated almost $350 billion worth of bonds or securities, or issued that number of bonds and securities. On the other hand, the United States has engaged in the same process. Just for your information, this was the first time the Australian government engages in this sort of practice under the label of quantitative easing, because they said we need this money to basically pay people when the productivity was at its bare minimum and the government was generously paying people while they sitting at home. The United States continued to practice this same sovereign right of issuing security bonds. And in March 2020, they issued at least $500 billion worth of bonds. In June 2020, 2021, another 80 billion and 40 billion. By late 2021, they issued about $1.5 trillion worth of bonds. So how this actually process happens, the government issues those bonds and release them in the primary market. So the primary market is a place where only licensed primary dealers like big banks and financial institutions can buy those bonds. So like who? Like obviously the big banks, the big commercial banks. So they go out, they buy those security bonds from the government, and then the earnings or the proceeds go directly into the government budget so that the government start funding all the financial commitments that they have. But the money that has been paid now from whoever hold these bonds from the primary market, this money is existing money. So what happens next? This whoever holds these bonds from the primary market then releases them into the secondary market. But in the secondary market, not only licensed institutions can participate, everyone can participate, from banks to funds to investors to pension funds. There's the variety of investors who can participate and buy those bonds. Typically, it's the commercial banks again who go and buy those bonds, and you will see why the commercial banks are interested in this particular part of security bonds or investments. So when the commercial bank or any investor holds or purchases those bonds, then they go and they sell them into the RBA or to the central bank. So now the central bank is going to be purchasing those bonds from the holder from the secondary market. So how the RBA or the central bank purchases them? The government bonds are purchased by the central bank creating new reserve or new electronic money. So basically, it's these numbers is created on the balance sheet of the RBA to pay whoever holds this money or these bonds from the secondary markets. By doing that, the RBA now is engaging in this practice of injecting new money into the system, because this money used to buy those bonds are new money. They're not existing money. This is how the money is created. Okay, it's basically transferring papers, okay, issued by the Treasury now into $100 billion injected into the markets. So obviously, that means higher liquidity. And when liquidity is higher, as we said, according to the QTM or quantity theory of money, that makes the prices higher. So you can see this in higher asset prices like stocks, housing, goods and services in general, which we call it inflation or hyperinflation, which we are all feeling nowadays after COVID. But is that all what happens? Like, does the commercial bank just go to buy these bonds and they don't even get to hold them to get this 1% payment and just hold them for 10, 30 years? No, that's not the case, because this is very, very like basic sort of investment, which is the yields out of these investments not that I would say appealing. So there must be something, there must be a reason why the commercial banks are interested in this, and what incentive does actually the government give the commercial banks to go and buy those bonds from the primary or the secondary market? It is basically that this policy that the government has or the RBA has, which is whoever bank gets to acquire those bonds and sell them into the RBA, okay, they get something called a credit on their reserve account. So why this credit, higher credit on their reserve account matter? Because a higher credit on the reserve account means that bank has higher ability to lend the mortgage borrowers or the borrowers for mortgage loans to buy houses, etc., etc. And that is the very specific way how the banks can actually create more money and earning interest, which amplify their ability to generate revenue and generate profit. But this will be something for another day to discuss this topic in details. Now, when the RBA now acquired those bonds and those securities, and they wait until it gets to their maturity date, and throughout the government has been paying the RBA these interest rates, which is again, it's just a transferring the numbers from like this balance sheet to this balance sheet. But when the time comes and it's due to the government to pay the RBA the amount which is called the principal, the question is, does the government save up for like 10 years or 30 years then to pay the RBA the due payment for these maturity bonds? The answer is no. So how does the government then funds paying off for those bonds? By creating new bonds. So they create fresh bonds, they inject it into the primary market to roll over the maturing ones. And that is the very reason why the debt keeps accumulating, keeps growing, growing, and growing. So in short, the government, through its two arms, the central bank and the RBA, which are very intertwined, they can basically move the money from one arm to another. And then the government can easily run their deficit, knowing that the central bank is backstopping the demand for its debt. So looking at some data that we have, it's a very worrying data, but over the period of 3 years, from 2020 to 2023, the government has issued about $848.7 billion of government securities. So taking a look on two examples of those securities, you got the GSPW30, which is a bond issued in 14th of May 2020. That one had a interest rate of 1% paid annually, and it was for 10 years. Another bond, the 2051 Treasury bond, 30 years long and with 0.82%. So you can see the effect of that on the Australian government debt. You see how it has been increasing remarkably from 2003 all the way to 2020, and then post-COVID, it just keeps getting worse and worse. And then you can see in the United States as well, in between 2006 and 2025, how the debt has been accumulating and growing from 5 trillion back in 2006. Now it's reached around 37 or 38 billion in 2025. You can also see that the biggest winner of this process are the commercial banks, the big four. And by looking at this chart, you see how the four banks are sitting among the top 7 profitable companies in Australia, obviously alongside the mining companies. So in short, this practice of issuing security bonds out of thin air, unbacked by any sort of like assets or commodities, and then trading them through these two primary and secondary market. By doing this basically trick, the government gets to increase the money supply in the economy and depreciating the value of money, and that was causing hyperinflation. So for people who are thinking that the issue of this inflation and the living cost is getting higher and on life becoming difficult, blaming it on migration, I invite them to watch this video and try to educate themselves, because the solution is not to get rid of people who are basically doing jobs that the government or the country needs. The solution is to argue the government to make reforms about this monetary and fiscal policy.
of the United States. When I talk to my conservative friends right here, they always tell me that the problem is high taxes, but they're wrong. Of course, high taxes are extremely high here in the United States. I give you that. You're right in that. But that's not the real problem. The real problem is not the high taxes themselves, but the fact that they are not even really funding the government. Not even those high taxes, higher than a lot of places in the world, not even those taxes are really funding the government. So who's financing the government? Government is financed by Treasury bonds, paper. And who buys the Treasury bonds? Mostly the Fed. And how does the Fed buy them? By printing money. But what backing does the Fed have for that money being printed? The Treasury bonds themselves. So basically, you finance the government by printing money out of thin air. Someone could ask, well, so if the government can print the limited amounts of money out of thin air, why did they collect taxes? I mean, in theory, it would make sense, right? If they can print unlimited amounts of money, why would they need taxes for? The answer is simple, but it's very shocking. The real problem is that you pay high taxes only to uphold the illusion that you are funding the government, which you are not. It's shocking, but it's true. The government is funded by money printing, paper backed with paper, a bubble that will inevitably burst. The situation is even worse than it seems, because if most Americans and the rest of the world were to become aware of this farce, confidence in your currency will be lost, the dollar will fall, and the Western civilization with it.